we're really pleased to see the turnout, and particularly the distinguished group that has come together so that we can continue to address these economic issues and the realities that face us all. A particular thanks to the Fund for Our Economic Future for hosting this public forum and for the information that they will be sharing this morning. And a special thanks to those presenters for their time, for their expertise, and for their wisdom. The Fund plays a critical role for all of us, and the Fund was just last week highlighted by the National Journal magazine as, quote, pragmatic problem solvers in business, the civic sector, local government, and partnerships that creatively combine all three, end quote. So our congratulations to the Fund for this well-deserved recognition. We thank you as the leaders in the greater Akron region, in business, in industry, in government, education, the community organizations. We are collectively in the position to make a difference, so we really appreciate your taking the time to come here today. It reflects on your commitment to strengthening this community and to ensure the residents the success and the thriving and the vibrant community that we all seek for. As you can see from our program, this forum is also sponsored by the Regional Innovation Institute. The Institute, as envisioned by Dr. Proenza, serves in various roles, but particularly as a convener. It encourages interactions and the creations of synergies of the various players. The synergies that lead to regional growth, that facilitate productivity and innovation, that promotes access to a skilled workforce, supports knowledge creation, and provides a mechanism such as this for sharing what we've learned with the community and with the policy and the decision makers. You'll hear a little more about the Regional Innovation Institute later. It was launched by Dr. Proenza in an April event where we hosted the Boston Foundation. So to kick this off, we're really pleased to introduce Brad Whitehead, President of the Fund for Our Economic Future, and Emily Garpichetti, Manager for Research Grants and Evaluation for the Fund. And they will walk us through some interesting information that they've pieced together. Brad.
Thanks, Wayne, and good morning, everybody. It was great last week with the announcement by the National Journal about this award, setting out Northeast Ohio as one of the leading examples of putting together a regional economic strategy. One of the things I want to make crystal clear, though, is that while the fund was lifted up, is that if you actually read the story and read what the award is about, it's really about the work of everybody in this room, and the discussion was about the building of networks to drive change. So that really is an award for all of Northeast Ohio, and it just happened that, fortuitously for us, I guess, but that we got to go and shake hands on behalf of all of you. So I appreciate your joining us this morning, and thanks to University of Akron for hosting this conference. I think most of you in this room are familiar with the Fund for Our Economic Future, but for those of you who are not, it is the philanthropic community's response to the long-term regional challenges and opportunities facing Northeast Ohio. And Northeast Ohio for us is that upper 40% of the state that comprises the Canton, Akron, Youngstown, Cleveland metropolitan areas. Would also pick up Lorain, Elyria, out to Ashtabula, and the sort. We have 7 members from the greater Akron area. I see most of them here today, and it's good to be here on their behalf, including the Knight Foundation, the GAR Foundation, the Akron Community Foundation, the University of Akron, First Energy, the Burton D. Morgan Foundation, and the SUMA hospitals. I think I got all 7 of you. If not, I apologize. Now, most of the work we do is behind the scenes, and to the extent that we are known for things, it's usually for the big grants that we make to things. And so we have provided grant support to initiatives that are probably familiar to many of you, whether that's in the world of business attraction and expansion and so forth, for Team Northeast Ohio. We're thinking about technology clusters through the regional intermediary Nortec and so forth. But really, I think at the core of what we're trying to do is to get alignment to the extent possible in what's happening at the regional level with the even more important activities that are occurring at the local levels. Because the proposition we have is that the endeavor that we're embarked upon is a little like that old parable of stone soup, where you remember that if everybody from the village brings something and puts it in the pot, fabulous things can happen. And that's really the proposition we have here for our economic opportunities in Northeast Ohio, is that we have wonderful assets around the region that are all very, very good. But if we come together, it can be truly great. University of Akron is a very, very good institution. University of Akron with Kent State, with Cleveland State, with Case Western and so forth becomes something truly great. The city of Canton is a special place. The city of Canton, when pulled together with Akron, Cleveland, Youngstown, is something truly great. And I think examples of that, and I won't go into a ton of examples, are things, I'm struck very much by one where the University of Akron played a particularly important leadership role. You probably all have heard about this $40 million grant for the National Additive Manufacturing Innovation Institute. Northeast Ohio wasn't supposed to win this first in the nation grant. I mean, if it was going to happen, I seem to recall it was going to be either upstate New York or some such thing of that, and they said if Ohio was going to do something, it was surely going to be Columbus, because we just frankly didn't have any individual institution that had the throw weight in order to garner that kind of federal support. But then when you think about the kind of roll-to-roll polymer technologies right here, you pull that together with the liquid crystal technologies at Kent, some of the smart sensor capabilities over at Lorain County Community College, some of the innovative workforce programs at Stark State and Eastern Gateway Community College, some of the engineering that's prevalent at both Case Western and some of the technical capabilities at Cleveland State. Suddenly we had something really big, and we won the only one of these things in the country. And so that is what we're talking about in terms of stone soup. So if the goal is to align resources, then the trick, though, is to make sure that we all see things the same way. You know, that's the tricky thing about regional economic development, is that nobody's in charge. Right? There's no mayor of Northeast Ohio or CEO of the 16 counties that comprise us. Instead, we have all these wonderful independent actors that can do amazing things, but they'll do what advances their mission. And so at the core of a lot of the work that we're trying to advance in collaboration with the University of Akron and other universities is to see whether we can come up with a common set of perspectives on the challenges that are in front of us. Because if we start seeing things the same way, we'll start agreeing on common priorities, and when we agree on common priorities, we'll find ways to align our resources without anybody wagging their finger and saying, thou shalt do X or Y. And that's really the motivation behind a lot of our research agenda and the what matters that we'll hear about this morning. Now, we don't do any of this alone, and we're quite proud of the partnerships we have with the higher education system here in Northeast Ohio. So the research that you'll see this morning unfolded in a partnership with not only the Federal Reserve Bank of Cleveland, but really the analytic heavy lifting was led by Cleveland State University. And I think Maritza Piazza and Irina Lindell and maybe Ziona Austrian are here this morning if the really tough questions come. But we've also partnered with Lorain County Community College on things like information technology workforce in Voices and Choices, with Kent State University on the Civic Commons and the Efficient Gov Now program that you may be familiar with. And we've had a long and fruitful partnership with the University of Akron around things. I saw Ed Morrison here in the room and Diane Palmentera, where we partnered on work that's been lifted up by the Brookings Foundation around our metropolitan economic strategy, and that was done with the University of Akron. So we're trying to work in and across with these higher education assets, and that's a little about what we'll hear this morning. And so leading us through the materials this morning will be Emily Garbachetti, who serves as the head of grants, research, and evaluation at the fund. This is research that we have conducted several times over the last decade, but this is the first glimpse at this sort of analysis post-Great Recession, and it tries to uncover what are the things that matter in the economy. I won't steal Emily's thunder except to say that there's a lot in here that we all know and that reinforces a lot of the investments that we've been making. Frankly, there was some stuff in here that was quite surprising to us. And it suggests, at least to those of us in the fund, we'll see what it means to all of you here, that it's time for an evolution in our thinking about our economic strategy. Because while we seem to be turning the overall ship, that there are some worrying clouds on the horizon in terms of our ability to link our economic growth agenda with our economic opportunity agenda, and that we mustn't be leaving people behind if we're going to sustain the kind of growth that we've achieved. So with that, I'll say nothing more than that, Emily, on this, but let me turn it over to Emily. Our role at the fund here is to listen really hard to what you have to say during the discussion. We'll take that to shape our strategy, and then hopefully a success will also be you'll take away a couple of thoughts and ideas here that may move us all to sort of seeing the situation similarly. So Emily?
Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. We, the fund, would, and thank you, Brad, for the introduction. We would not be here if we didn't think this work was relevant not only to our strategies at the fund, but your strategies on the ground here in the Akron area. So thank you all for being here. What Matters to Metros was released on May 2nd, and it really aimed to help us understand what are those factors that are associated with a successful, resilient, prosperous economy. And I'm going to go through the findings here today. What I'll do is kind of reserve 5 or 10 minutes at the end to ask questions, to hopefully answer those questions. And then the most important part of today will be listening to our panelists. As Brad said, we really want to listen to what the takeaways are for you all here in the Akron area. So the fund is a collaboration of over 50 philanthropic organizations across the 16-county region of Northeast Ohio. And our mission is really to promote a regional economic competitiveness agenda. We work with a lot of the partners that you'll see here across the region. Many of these logos will seem familiar to you. And what I want to emphasize with this slide is that these are grantees from the reason why these are our partners and this is part of the network is because the fund has been very intentional about what we do and why we do it. And all that strategic grant making is grounded in the reality of what's going on in the economy. So here is some of our past work. What Matters to Metros came out of research that started back in 2006 out of a white paper in collaboration with the Federal Reserve Bank of Cleveland, and has since evolved over time to this, what you may have heard to be the Regional Dashboard of Economic Indicators. So every year we kind of track ourselves on those things that, that are really important to the economy, like education, grad degrees, patents, and so on and so forth. But we realized that this year in a post-recession economy, we really needed to understand not so much how we change from year to year, but what is really different now than it was 10 or 20 years ago. So really understanding what's important in a post-recession economy was the purpose of this report that you see here. And that's What Matters to Metros Foundational Indicators for Economic Competitiveness. So these are the three main findings. I don't want you to hold your breath too long. I'm going to go through them briefly, and then we'll dive into each one. So the first is that education and innovation we found to be more connected than we have in the past. Entrepreneurship and inclusion is number 2. These don't usually go together, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But this simply means that where we found the high levels of self-employment and startups, we also found those to be the more diverse and integrated places in the U.S. And the third is the most sobering finding, and that is that the places in the U.S. that have grown the most in terms of jobs, where we saw the biggest increases in employment, those were some of our highest poverty, highest crime, highest low-income areas. The places that we saw grow the most in terms of jobs were the highest poverty, highest inequality places in the country. So just for some context, here's our the Northeast Ohio economy output in red, and then the U.S. in the dotted blue. And you can see that actually since the 70s, this graph only shows since the 90s, but we've been underperforming. Northeast Ohio has been underperforming the national economy for decades. I do want to highlight that we had a little peak up there after the 1990s recession where we did recover faster relative to the U.S. economy, but we dropped back down again. And so what I want to emphasize here in this presentation today is that from 2010 to 2011, we did it again. We've actually outpaced the national economy on 3 measures: output, productivity, and per capita income. But we want to understand, I'm sorry, I advanced a little too quickly there. We want to understand how to sustain that growth, right? So it's not just about, oh, great, we're doing better than the nation, but can we do better than the nation for the next 5 years or 10 years is really what we're aiming for here today. So how did we get here? We took 115 mid-size metros from across the country, and these ranged in size from about the size of Canton, 400,000, to the size of a San Diego or a Seattle, which is about 3.5 million. And of course, we care most about Northeast Ohio. So here you go. Here are 4 metros. Akron sits right there in the middle at about 700,000. Cleveland's up around 2 million, and like I said, we looked at metros that go all the way up to the over 3 million. We represent as a region $166 billion in gross product and over 4 million people. So then out of those 115 metros, we looked at 55 different variables, and you'll see the list here. It's quite a list. We looked at things from broadband to BA degrees to the labor cost index, crime rates, vacant housing, birth rates, foreign-born populations. We looked at a lot of data. And what we did that's a little different than just picking indicators and saying, okay, how are we doing on this, was that we did a factor analysis to group that list into 6 different factors. So after we conducted that analysis, we got these 6 groupings which represent 70% of the variation from metro to metro. So you can see here each of the 6. We have education, innovation, entrepreneurship and inclusion, economic polarization that I mentioned before. And then we have these other 3 that are mentioned in the report. They don't represent as much of the variation, but things like business costs, dynamics of place, which includes things like vacant housing and manufacturing shares, and connectivity, which is commute times, domestic air travel. Those are also in there, but they didn't make up as much of the variation. So we're going to focus on those first 3 you see, and these make up 50% of the variation from metro to metro. So you'll see if you scour through the report, this is really what we focus on, and it's the heart of what I'm going to talk about today. So what matters? There's a lot of data there. We care about what matters to 4 things. Not just jobs, not just GMP, not just productivity, not just income. It's all four of these things. And we wanted to understand how each of these factors played with these different dynamics. So we're going to start with education and innovation. You can see that there are positive associations with variables related to education and innovation, a positive relationship with GMP per capita income and productivity. There is no relation to jobs. It just means it's not statistically significant. But there's not a positive or a negative relationship. So if you want to use education as a job creation strategy, you might be a little off. But nonetheless, we see that education and innovation is the bedrock of a healthy economy. I mean, it really correlates highly to all these other measures. So let's dive in here. You have the map with the darker green metros, scoring higher on the education and innovation related variables. And I want to just remind folks here that this is a composite of things like tech transfer and patents and advanced degrees and BA degrees. This is not a variable in and of itself. So some of the places we saw score really high on this factor were places like Durham, Chapel Hill, and we point this one out because we did see a lot of the metros that scored the highest were anchor metros. They benefited from places like strong university and hospital systems, and that was undeniable. We couldn't really take those out of the data. It was incredibly important to the economy of these places. And Northeast Ohio scored a little lower on this factor. It was one of the lower metropolitan areas on this factor, but we are not denying that there is so much potential and opportunity and tremendous assets here in the region. We just need to figure out how to scale it up. Obviously, the University of Akron, Nortech, Bioenterprise, the Global Business Accelerator, ABIA, University Park Alliance, all these things help make for a really rich, robust ecosystem for innovation. It's just not enough, right? We need to figure out where we play in the broader national economy and scale up. So the next, is entrepreneurship and inclusion, and you can see what we mean by this indicator is that it's really associated with every measure, positively associated with every measure of economic growth. And I'm just going to remind folks here that we're talking about things like self-employment, business starts, a lot of the mom and pop shops, which would classify as that self-employment number, you're getting those in here, but you're also getting the higher tech innovation-led entrepreneurship as well in this factor. And Austin was one of those ones that scored really high, a hotbed of innovation there. And then Northeast Ohio, we also have a lot of initiatives, currently a lot of assets to build on, Jumpstart, PMBA, Evergreen Cooperative that came from Columbus to Cleveland. A lot of stuff going on, but still we ranked pretty low in this indicator. And then we go on to that one, remember I said that one tricky finding, one of those challenging findings that make you scratch your head and ask a lot of questions. So we called this economic polarization, and this is a composite factor of things like poverty, crime, low-income populations, and we have income inequality, and we found that to be, like I said, positively associated with job growth over the past 2 decades, but negatively associated to per capita income growth. So just to understand this and unpack it a little more, you can see that when you place job growth, which is on the right, and kind of the factor score for economic polarization on the left, you see that the places, just look at the first one, McAllen, Texas. If you just looked at job growth, it looks great, 109% job growth in the past 2 decades. But you look over here at economic inequality, at poverty and crime, it also scored the highest. So it tells us we want to be really careful about what we look at as a growth strategy. And here's, the poster child for a boom and bust economy, Las Vegas. We saw a lot of the metros that scored high in this variable were in the South and Southwest. They were in the Florida metros, the California metros that really the housing crisis hit pretty hard. And of course, you know, at the end of the recession, those were the most unequal, poorest places in the country. So then it makes you ask the question, well, who did really well? And it's hard. When you look at job growth, again, which is on the right-hand side, there are a few metros that saw job growth and did not see their inequality and poverty levels rise. So one of the examples of one of those few metros that really were able to balance what we're calling the growth and opportunity agenda is Denver, Colorado. There were a couple others in there, but it's not an easy task. So we saw in Denver there were really tighter linkages between city and suburban communities and firms, and really a robust system there. But in Northeast Ohio too, we have a lot of opportunities for people from low to mid skill levels to kind of work up. But is it enough? And as we go into recovery mode, we really have to be, how do we get from those short-term jobs that kind of fill the hole in the recovery to those long-term jobs that provide opportunities for folks? And I put work advance and towards employment up here. It's a collaboration between our local partner towards employment and work advance, a national effort, to really follow people at the low to mid-skill levels, kind of up the ladder a little bit, to make sure that once they get a job, first of all, that the stuff they're trained in is matched with employer demand, and then that they're followed through that job and are able to kind of see a raise at the end of the day and have potential to stay at that job, not just for 6 months, but maybe a couple years, and maybe see higher wages and build up to something better. So I think that's really what we're looking at here, and there's a lot of, I noticed I put the Summit Education Initiative up there too. There's just so many good efforts. We need to build on them. And so here, this is a quote from the Nobel Prize-winning economist, Joseph Stiglitz. We typically talk about rising inequality and the sluggish recovery as separate phenomena when they are in fact intertwined. Inequality stifles, restrains, and holds back our growth. And this is, again, just a reminder that we're doing really well. We're outperforming the nation in this recovery. But as we map our path forward over the next 5, 10, and 20 years, what are our goals going to be? And let's make sure that they're comprehensive. So back again to this map of the economy, and we're focusing right there. Time to build on that growth. So I'll end there. I do want to take questions. I want to make sure that everybody understands what I've presented, so you can ask even better questions to the panelists. Yes, Jonathan.
Hello, Emily. On the growth and opportunity agenda, you use the example of Denver, Colorado, a community that has achieved both growth and opportunity. Would you characterize Denver as a community that has not yet racially tipped or reached the notice of point of critical mass, perhaps a quarter to a third minority population? And do you have any examples of communities that have both grown and created new opportunities that are more like Cleveland, Akron, that have perhaps tipped racially?
Well, I would say Portland, Maine, but I don't think it's had that tip yet. So yeah, there weren't, let me tell you that there weren't that many. And I'm not sure if you would consider Minneapolis a Cleveland, right? Or a Madison, Wisconsin, a Cleveland. But those were some of those metros. I do want to clarify what I mean when I talk about diverse and integrated metropolitan areas. The first is diversity. Part of that factor was a high percentage of foreign-born population. So the foreign-born population could look very different depending on what metro you're looking at. And then when I say integrated, I mean that there was less segregation, specifically African-American segregation. We use the dissimilarity index that some of you may be familiar with, and we saw lower scores in those places. So I think one of the points that I often emphasize this is a platform for those deeper discussions about what are some of those comparable metros out there and how can we use them as models for Northeast Ohio, or maybe we create our own model. Yeah. Yes?
Some of the metros that showed a positive correlation, were there certain industry sets that helped to drive that, or was it more of a social networking process?
Which correlation are you referring to?
When you talk about Austin, when you're talking about the correlation between job growth and
Inequality? Mm-hmm.
is that, do you see a correlation between certain types of industries in those markets that maybe have certain levels of jobs and types of jobs, or is it more about building collaboration within the communities?
Yeah, that's a great question. We did not see that through this study. We did look at manufacturing share, and a lot of people will say, well, those places, are either manufacturing, for example, has certain characteristics, or the high-tech economy has certain, higher skilled folks and then you have a band of lower skill folks that are supporting the few higher skilled workers. We didn't see any of that in this report. We didn't, that's not what we were looking for. I think now it's an example of where we do a deeper dive. I will say that one thing that I did see that was a bit surprising is that manufacturing didn't show up in any of those first three factors. So I think it speaks to the fact that 50 years ago, we saw manufacturing associated with kind of the stable jobs, the high incomes. 20 years ago, it was associated with, the poorest of the poor economies and the ones that were going downhill. And now it's just such an evolving sector. It's so complex. And it's so different depending on what kind of metropolitan area you're looking for. Some of these generalizations make it really hard. The economic polarization example, we put some pictures, one of the, I think an RN, and my colleague Bethia Burke is out there, she sent me a statistic a couple weeks ago, that RNs were one of the few fastest growing jobs in Ohio, or the only fastest growing job in Ohio that paid a living wage. So I think these are complex topics. I just wanted to recognize that there are a few different trends happening. Yeah.
I thought it was especially fascinating for several of us who are working on these regional economic strategies. And over the last decade, we've spent this time, praying to two gods, the God of jobs and the God of incomes, and thinking about those almost as interchangeable. And we would have goals for each. And at least as I look at this research, it says that really what you do to get the two different things may be somewhat different. And there has been this inclination to say jobs, 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 when in fact it says that maybe all jobs aren't created equal. And this is playing out real time right now in Columbus and up here as well, because it says that you might pursue a particular strategy if it's jobs, 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 where we know or we see the correlations of good jobs require investment. And so things like the Third Frontier program or the Ohio Capital program or investments in higher education represent investments in taxes that are positively correlated with incomes. And so to me, it's a healthy debate, but we shouldn't be so quick to talk about jobs and income in the same breath. And that jobs alone, as Emily said, ought to be a bridge to good, life-sustaining careers and jobs.
Yeah. And just to add on to that, I think the quick answer would be that no one sector has all the solutions. Is that we're just generally seeing a lot of movement in a lot of different sectors in different ways. So it's a combination of many sectors that could make for a healthy economy. It just depends what those jobs look like, right? And who benefits from them.
I'm interested in the Denver, Colorado example of a place that sort of
That's a great question, and I don't have an answer. But,
I do worry about, I
yeah.
worry about it. I think there's some economic reality and companies looking for opportunity in areas that have been depressed. That's just,
Yeah.
that's like basic economics, right? Supply and demand. So I wonder if some of these shining examples don't have some other factors that are causing them to be shining examples that we need to throw down.
Yeah, I think population inflows and outflows are extremely important. Who's moving in, who's moving out, and then of course here in Northeast Ohio we have a stagnant population. So what does our goal look like in 5 years? So those are all good questions, and hopefully this is a start for conversations like those. Yes.
Yes, I'm curious if you looked at factors like public transportation.
I'm sorry. I meant to ask if everyone could say their name and where they're from, but if you would like.
Lacey with Round River Consulting. I'm curious if you looked at factors related to the economic polarization issue, such as public transportation. Do people actually have a way to get to jobs that would provide more opportunity?
Great question. So it's not just about jobs, but access to those jobs. It is increasingly, I think that dominated our conversation when we were in Youngstown last week. The new Sustainable Communities Consortium study is coming out with a lot of data just about how spread out we are, and especially for a stagnant population, are we just, when it has a lot of issues, right? Land use is tied to everything from business development to inequality to housing stock. So I think it is hard to have just a crisp answer for you on there, but I think that when you do look at the data, it's incredibly important to look at commute time, commuting distance. We have all that data here. It's part of the study, but we didn't see it necessarily group with economic polarization, if you will.
Emily, can you repeat the questions because we cannot hear them back here?
Oh, okay.
Do we have mics?
Yes, they're up front.
So,
Oh, okay, just repeat the questions so we can hear them.
And
I,
I think the question was there about the link between transportation access and polarization. And one of our reads of the data is that it puts two challenges in front of us. One is the very thorny but clear to most of us one of making sure that we have a workforce that is prepared for the jobs that are there and the talent development. The other one, at least I think we at the fund would assert, gets less play, but is equally important and is right in the crosshairs of what the Vibrant NEO initiative is going after, is making sure that people have access to the jobs. And that's a particularly acute challenge in Northeast Ohio as our growth seems to be spreading out. And we have these pockets of people who can't get to the jobs that are being created. And so even if we get them prepared, they may not be able to get to the job. And the NUSCC has just come out with some interesting data around this. I don't know, Hunter, if you wanted to give a headline or two.
can you guys hear in the back?
Yeah, I'm on board.
I don't know if, yeah.
Director of the consortium. We've been looking at the relationship of jobs and households, and as it plays out on the equity side, we've been subsidizing the jobs to move further and further away from our supply lines, being our public transportation. One of the ways to reduce vehicle miles traveled and to increase accessibility is to put jobs back on the sites that traditionally they were on. And there are approximately 8,000 acres of land, vacant commercial and industrial land, various sizes along some of the high-quality transit routes in Northeast Ohio. This is just our first cut at it, but you will be seeing, when you come to our workshops in the end of July, early August, across Northeast Ohio, options where we are looking at how to better connect jobs and households by taking advantage of the transit infrastructure we already have. We basically have been walking away from our supply lines, and that means we are making it harder and harder for people to get to work, and harder for employers in places like Lake County
Yes.
My name is Mike Snyder, and I'm from ABIA. This is really interesting, and I think that you're 100% right about the job quality, job growth input. Also, I was wondering about the entrepreneurship and inclusion factor. I was asking about the entrepreneurship and inclusion factor. It looks like you had self-employment that loaded on the factor, and also a lot of inequality variables, so African American segregation, and also the obesity rate, it looked like. So I was wondering if you had any more interpretations about why those variables seem to stick together, or why they didn't sort of load separately on different, maybe a possible seventh factor or something like that.
Sure. I won't slip back to the slide because it'll take me 3 minutes to get there. But yes, so that was a factor that was made up. So we're talking about the entrepreneurship and inclusion. Why did these load together? Again, that was business starts, high self-employment rates, and then you're right, we did see obesity load in there, and trying to think the dissimilarity index and the high percentage of foreign born. So I think, especially looking at those metros that scored high on this factor, you realize that some of those small mom and pop shops for a lot of lower income or minority populations are a boon to the economy. They help those neighborhoods. And it seemed like it was really dependent on the metro that you're looking at to determine if that entrepreneurship looked like grocery stores and salons, or if that entrepreneurship was looking more like, high-tech startups coming out of universities. Regardless, these were your more diverse places, and to do deeper dives as far as, what share, what type of entrepreneurship you're looking at in different places is going to be really important. It's something that I think we're paying a lot of attention to here, because you'll notice we have a lot of, you have Jumpstart, which works with high-tech entrepreneurs, and then you have your microloan program with Evergreen. And we're saying, it really shows that, both are really important. You can't just focus on one and ignore the other. And that both those types of entrepreneurship, if you will, are positively associated with economic growth. Not only in job growth, but also productivity growth and GMP growth and income growth. So I don't have a more detailed answer for you, but again, I just want to encourage people that are interested in specific variables. All the data is public and online. We tried really hard to make it easy. It's not the most beautiful format in the world. We give it to you in a good old Excel spreadsheet, but we want people to use this stuff. And we don't ask for any information or passwords. You just give us your email, your zip code, and you have access to the data. So, any other? This room is really dominant. Anything from over here? Okay, so we have two over there in the corner. Yeah.
Question about your economic output.
Sorry, there's a mic coming. And just say where you're from and your name, please.
Hi, I'm Tia. I'm with the City of Akron, and typically I'm loud enough not to need a mic. On your economic output chart, I noticed, what were the similarities that you found the 2 times that we outranked the U.S.?
I keep referring that question to Ned Hill, and he hasn't answered me yet. But so yes, I'm getting a lot of questions from reporters. Well, why did that happen in the early '90s recession? Was it the type of recession that really determined how we got out of the recession? These are tricky questions, and I'm not a PhD economist. But if any of you in the room know the answer to that, I would. Arena, maybe Arena might. No, Arena. No, but it's something that, I think we need to understand better, and I think this report highlights the fact that if we don't want that to happen again. We want to have a sustained recovery. Usually you do see, what we saw in terms of, productivity and income is outpacing the nation right now, I can say that's a good lead indicator, because when you have higher wages and you have higher productivity, it's more likely that people are going to hire. So that bodes well for the future. I don't know what happened before where we couldn't kind of build on that and we didn't make it happen. But
Were any of the same categories used that you did your testing now then?
yeah, we looked at output. That's the general output of the economy, and that correlates very highly with jobs. Yes, yes. Any other questions? Oh, a question from Tom. Okay. Make it easy, please.
Hi, Emily. Tom Waltemeyer, Team NEO. On the question about the outperformance, the work we've done looks like it's mainly our unusually large proportion of manufacturing, which of course has a stronger cycle, tends to fall faster and recover percentage-wise more. So it's, I think on your chart, you can see the outperformance tends to be after significant underperformance in both of these, both of those periods. You can see the current one and the one back there. We're way below the blue line. We tend to bounce back. And it's not sustained because it's basically just a sharp down, sharp up, and then your steady state is more of a slower growth.
And why don't you give us the optimistic news about manufacturing in the next 20 years?
Well,
or would you like me to?
Yeah, well, the good part, as at least the national models say, that our manufacturing sector will grow faster on a sustained basis over the next decade than the rest of the country, which would be probably the first time in 50 or 60 years that has happened, because our manufacturing sector, while being fairly flat, has been significantly underperforming. So that would be a real change.
Yep.
So that's hopeful. But my question to you is a little bit more building on Brad, and I think maybe this is what you're now planning to do, is whether you've been able yet to go into the metros that had the higher job growth or the higher output growth and look at what sectors that higher output was in, and particularly from the standpoint of the degree it's in the more export, as we call them, I mean the export-oriented industries, where people not exporting outside the U.S., but exporting outside their regions, whether those kinds of sectors were growing more rapidly there, or whether it was more population serving.
Yeah, I think the traded sector did, we had a general variable called, percentage of export related, growth or something like that. And that factored in with the first one, which was education and innovation. So a lot of those places that scored high in education and innovation, I would probably start there and look at what sectors grew the most there. And then I did want to emphasize with the manufacturing example that this is where it becomes really important to distinguish what you're growing. Are you growing output? Are you growing jobs? They may not always be the same. Are you growing income with those jobs? And in the manufacturing example, what Tom was referring to is an advantage in output. I think annual percentage rates are going to be like 10 percentage points above the nation in 10 years or something, which is great. But we also have to acknowledge that the manufacturing sector is also, you're going to see a decrease in jobs. So the number of jobs that are going to be available, while more productive, are going to be fewer. And that kind of healthcare picks up the slack in that jobs notion. But I did just want to distinguish there, and I think Tom has a follow-up.
Yes, the follow-up is, but remember when you say jobs available, so our last report, yes, said that we're still expecting about a 10% reduction over the next decade in the headcount of people doing manufacturing work. However, because of retirements and regular turnover, production workers, or something like 50,000 production workers, are going to need to be hired over the next decade. So in terms of jobs available, the openings is really the measure. So you can have this situation where you have, because of productivity, continued very gradual reductions in headcount, but a lot of openings that are going to need to be filled. So there's a lot of jobs available in manufacturing, we know right now. I mean, we all know there's a shortage of skilled manufacturing people out there.
Yep. Thank you for that addition. Okay, I think we're going to move to the panel because that's where it gets really interesting to talk about what happens here in Akron. I think I'll leave it there.